Hi, this is JoScott Morgan. I wanted to speak with you very briefly about the death of Tammy Daybell. She died in Fremont County, Idaho, back in October of 2019 under some rather curious circumstances. She was only 49 years old and by all counts was healthy, fit. She was even training to participate in a competitive race. Certainly somebody that you wouldn't necessarily peg as to suddenly die. To the best of our knowledge, she had no previous complaints. We have very little information relative to her prior medical history. What her husband at the time, who was Chad Daybell, had reported was that the night before her death, she was found dead the next morning, she was coughing a bit, but the information is sketchy at best and not very specific. The morning that she was found deceased, though, by her husband, Chad, one of her daughters that lived just a few doors down had come to the home. Her name was Emma, and allegedly what Emma observed at that point in time was that there was a kind of a pink frothy cone that was issuing forth from her nose and her mouth. There may have not been some blood that was kind of streaking down. Most of the time in medical legal death investigations, one of the things that we notice or that we make note of when we see this frothy edematous cone is that somebody might be, for instance, in the throes of a congestive event. They're having heart or lung issues. Sometimes this is associated with actually exposure to certain agents, particularly certain types of drugs that bring about these events. But to that point, we have very little information. What we have been told was that the coroner did not attend the scene, allegedly. And this is very important. As a former medical legal death investigator, I can tell you it's important because of this. You want to see the body in its pristine state, what we refer to as being in situ. Observe it around, surrounded by all of the elements in which it is found deceased. And in Tammy's case, this was not done. We want to do things like body temperature. We want to do a rigidity assessment to see how stiff the body is relative to rigor mortis. We want to observe the placement, the distribution, and the level of fixation of postmortem lividity or the settling of blood. Gravity draws it down to its lowest point. But because this was not done at the scene, there's no way to go back and appreciate this, because you can't go back once you get a body to a funeral home, for instance, and measure the body temperature, because now you've taken it out of its natural environment. So this was not accomplished. Now, we have an understanding that the body had been taken back to the funeral home, and maybe or maybe not, the coroner may have attended the funeral home and observed her body there. But here's the problem. There was never any blood drawn. There was never any urine drawn. There was never any vitreous drawn from the eyes. And the reason this is a huge obstacle for us as we look back in time at Tammy's death is that we don't have any of these essential elements in order to test, to do toxicology on, for instance, to see if she had anything in her system or to give us any kind of indication if she had health problems that would have made a seemingly otherwise healthy 49-year-old lady suddenly die in her sleep. That's the exception and not the norm nationally, and we need to keep that in the forefront of our mind. Her body was then fully embalmed, and she had to be taken from one state to another. She was transported from Idaho to Utah, where she was essentially there for many, many weeks before she was disinterred or exhumed by court order. One of the problems with this is that once you have removed all of the body fluids from an individual and then infused the body with embalming fluids, you change the totality of the post-mortem nature of the body. There's no longer anything to really test. So when you're looking at the body, say for instance, in her case, they did an exhumation and a subsequent autopsy at the Utah State Medical Examiner's Office. They very well may have been able to appreciate some kind of trauma if there was choking and you had hemorrhage in the muscles, or maybe you had petechiae in the eyes. But other than that, all other evidence is going to be gone at this point in time. So that leaves the state medical examiner, the forensic pathologist, in somewhat of a conundrum. And now we've waited. We've waited well in excess of a year for Tammy Daybell's results to come in. And they have. They have come in. The Utah State Medical Examiner has released these results to the prosecutor in Fremont County, Idaho. But the prosecutor and the sheriff have both said, because this is an ongoing death investigation, those results are not going to be released to the public. So what does that tell us? Well, it tells us, I think at least, that they may have found something. We don't know what that is quite yet, but we do know this. If all of the normal parameters and all of the national standards had been adhered to in the death of Tammy Daybell, if just for that moment in time the body had been examined in place, toxicology had been drawn, and maybe even an autopsy in Idaho when she first died in October 2019, we wouldn't be faced with this problem. Thanks for listening.